Last time I covered haptic motors in detail, people asked for a comparison. But I only had one type to work with. This time I've got all three. Simnet sent these for review, but as always, my opinion is earned, not bought. You will get a thorough dive, from theory to real world performance all the way to latency test. These are haptic motors from Simnet, which immediately caught my attention as soon as I found out about them. Because, as far as I know, they are the only company to produce three different types of haptic motors. You have ERM, LRA, and Transducer. We will be talking technicalities soon, but boy, these are heavier than they seem. The hefty feel in hand suggests they are well built, and the quality of the material used further reinforces that impression. This is flagship grade build quality you're seeing here, and it is very impressive. The ERM weighs 182 grams, LRA 333 grams, and Transducer 258 grams. So not exactly light, but given the dimensions, yeah, good heft. They are even shaped differently, which I think is kind of cool. The ERM looks like Jerry's home. LRA can be best described as a squircular cylinder, or a squilinder. Transducer is just a cylinder. Talking about the price, the transducer costs $40, ERM $20.90 and LRA $65.90. This includes amount which is for the Simnet pedals. But if you plan on using these with other pedals, check out their website for mounting options or browse Etsy or other websites such as simracemods.com. These require a control box and power supply, both of which are sold separately. Power supply costs $19 and outputs a max of 24 volts at 3 amperes. The control box is priced at $59 and seems well built, except it has a slight rattle, which after a quick teardown revealed that the circuit board is the culprit as it slides between these metal brackets. I'm sure something can be done here to prevent this because circuit boards rarely make good musical instruments. Now these haptics were originally supposed to be a part of my Husing quilt, but the correct mounts did not come in the box, so I had to work with what I got. I mounted them on SimMagic P1000s. Even though it fits perfectly, it changes the orientation of how motors are supposed to be mounted, which means this might change things. But I'll take that as an opportunity to talk about proper mounting as well. Now with the basic stuff out of the way, it's time to dig a bit deeper. Pedal haptics are more than just a gimmick. They are a game changer for immersion in a budget. To understand haptic feedback, you need to know the three main types of motors used. Each has strengths, weaknesses, and unique characteristics. So without further ado, let's start with ERM. It stands for eccentric rotating mass, a vibration motor found in everyday devices such as game controllers, some old cell phones, wearables, pagers, etc. My Xbox One controller has it too. These type of motors are very common and cost effective, with years of proven reliability. Its working principle is quite simple and straightforward, much like its name. If you look up the meaning of eccentric on Google, you will find that it means not placed centrally or not having its axis or other part placed centrally. That's exactly what is happening here. There is a mass deliberately mounted off-center to the shaft of this DC motor. Also 8500 RPM. Nice. When the shaft rotates, the off-center mass creates an unbalanced force, which we feel as vibrations. Think of your washing machine during a spin cycle. The vibrations that you feel are created by an unbalanced load because the clothes aren't distributed evenly inside the drum. It's essentially the same principle, an unbalanced mass spinning around creating vibrations. The only difference, in your washing machine, these vibrations are unintentional and often unwanted, while in an ERM, it's engineered precisely for functionality. This simple yet effective mechanism has a lot of advantages, such as being cost-effective, reliable, compactish, easy to control and work on, and the ability to produce strong vibrations. When I say strong vibrations, I don't necessarily mean in terms of frequency, but amplitude. The mass gets thrown around, which results in a more forceful, thumpy feedback. If all of this is getting complex, let me break it down using a simple graph. Here is our resting position, and you can see that the wave is traveling upwards and downwards in one vibration cycle. The distance between the resting position and maximum distance traveled is vibration amplitude. Vibration frequency is simply the number of times an object oscillates or vibrates in 1 second. And this is where it gets interesting. In the case of a rotational system, the frequency and amplitude increase together. Or in simple terms, strength and speed increase together. I cannot simply feed more voltage to increase either only the speed or only the strength. They are not directly proportional, but rather linked exponentially. Take a look at this. Right now, the motor's amplitude is set to 10. Our off-center mass creates not only weaker, but also slower vibrations. Increasing to 20 increases both strength and speed. At 50, this mass is whipping around so fast that the centrifugal force is creating a stronger thump simultaneously. At 100, this mass is spinning at its maximum speed, but somehow still retains the thump. Which can only mean one thing: the motor is not reaching its maximum speed. Perhaps it's limited electronically for reliability purposes. My point being, ERM motors have a specific range where they work best. Too slow and it is weak and sluggish. Too fast and all of that feedback start to blend together. Where this range lies for you, you have to find it out for yourself. This fundamental behavior of ERMs lead to some inherent disadvantages. Because of its rotational nature, the startup and stop times will have a delay. There will be latency issues, it will be a bit noisy, kind of power hungry, slightly imprecise, and won't have that high of a frequency range. The slow startup and stop times can be mitigated to some degree by software tuning or by using a bigger DC motor or opting for a small mass. But that's all just theoretical. We'll be conducting some tests in the later part of the video, but for now, let's move on to LRA, or Linear Resonant Actuator. Starting with the name, linear because it moves in a straight line. Resonant refers to its optimal operating frequency, and actuator because it causes motion. It is found in modern cell phones, a modern MacBook's trackpad, PS5 controller, military equipment, etc. These are mainly preferred for their compact size and precision over an ERM, especially when it comes to sim racing. Not only these are considered an upgrade, but also costs more. For this specific teardown, I bought myself a Bondhus Allen key set, the cheap one which I bought for $1, stripped instantly. This highlights the importance of using quality tools for precise work. Anyways, back to the teardown. While I was doing this, the magnetic force was very pronounced. My Allen key was getting pulled towards it. And like that simple pull, its working principle is simple too. Here you have a coil which surrounds the magnetic mass, which is suspended by springs. When the current flows through the coil, it creates a magnetic field that pushes and pulls the mass back and forth. This oscillation motion generates vibrations, which we feel as haptics. Think of a woodpecker. Yes, the bird. You know how it pecks the wood in that precise rhythmic manner that each hit is quick, controlled, and happens in the exact same spot. Well, unless it chooses to peck in a different angle. The woodpecker's head moves back and forth in a straight line, delivering these sharp, distinct impacts. That's exactly how an LRA motor works. Instead of a mass getting thrown around in circles like in an ERM, the LRA's mass moves back and forth in a straight line. And this is again where it gets interesting. Unlike ERM, where the frequency and amplitude are linked exponentially, LRA can control these independently. In simpler words, you can have more strength and less speed, or vice versa. Now the following video that I'm about to show you needs the entire motor to be put back together, or this happens. So as I was saying, I can have the amplitude at 100 and frequency at 5, which would mean the strength is max, but it vibrates really slowly. I can have both the strength and speed maxed out, or I can have maximum speed with little to no strength. Similar to ERM, this too has a specific range where it works best. Too slow and it's kind of pointless, too fast and it becomes a blender. Like I said earlier, where this range lies for you, you have to figure it out for yourself. This linear motion design gives it several advantages when compared to ERM. It is more precise, has better start-stop times, is very compact and lightweight, has less wear and tear since the movement is controlled, and is way more power efficient. By that, I mean they consume about 50 to 60% less power. But it also comes with its own set of trade-offs. It is more expensive and produces what we call refined but weaker vibrations compared to ERM. When I say weaker, think of it as a whisper versus a shout. One conveys detail, other simply grabs attention. It's not about less impactful vibrations, but rather more about delivering accurate, more focused vibrations instead of blunt, generalized ones. For sim racing, both ERM and LRA are usually preferred and have their own trade-offs. Majority of people prefer LRA on the brake because they want that near instantaneous feel of ABS kicking in or any other frequency they choose. Now this does not make ERM a slouch, but more on this later. For now, let's move on to transducer. Transducer is just a motor that converts one form of energy to another. In our case, electrical energy to mechanical motion. And yes, all three motors we discussed today are technically transducers as they all convert electrical energy to motion. But when we talk about transducers in sim racing, we are talking about a specific motor which often gets confused with base shaker. While every transducer can work as a base shaker, not every base shaker qualifies as a true transducer. This distinction is crucial for understanding their application in sim racing. Base shaker, as the name suggests, are designed specifically for low frequencies. Think of those theater seats that rumble during explosion scenes. That's a base shaker doing its thing. Transducers, on the other hand, can handle a much wider range of frequencies while maintaining precision. Like a guitar string, when you pluck it, it converts mechanical energy into both sound and vibrations. The string's movement is transferred through the bridge, making the whole guitar body resonate. That's exactly how our pedal transducer works, taking electrical energy and converting them into precise mechanical movements that you can feel. Now, while doing the teardown, I could only get this far into the transducer due to its internal assembly design. But that's okay, we can work with what we got. Also, 4 ohms of impedance. Nice. This part has a voice coil suspended within a magnetic field. When current flows through the coil, it creates its own magnetic field, which then interacts with the permanent magnets, causing movement. This movement can be precisely controlled by varying the current, allowing for a wide range of feedback types. This design gives transducers several unique advantages. They can produce both sharp, detailed feedback and strong, sustained vibrations. The response is nearly instantaneous, and they can maintain consistent strength across different frequencies. Also, since there are no rotating parts like in ERM or springs like in LRA, they tend to be quite durable. But of course, there are trade-offs. They typically draw more power compared to ERM and LRA. They are also usually larger and heavier, which can affect mounting options. And while they can handle a wide frequency range, they might not match the pure strength of a dedicated base shaker or the precision of an LRA at their specific sweet spot. For sim racing, transducer offers some unique options. You can choose to feel the subtle road texture, the heavy curb impacts, gear shifts, ABS, and all of that. It's like having best of both worlds, the strength when you need it and the detail when you want it. Of course, the key lies in tuning, and speaking of, let's talk about the software. Simnet has its own software called SimConnect Manager, which has very limited functionality for now as they're a new company, but the application shows promise. And I do think they are headed down the right path. I'll tell you why. When you go in the Haptics menu, you get to configure both the amplitude and frequency, which is the first time I'm seeing. Amplitude controls how strong the vibration is, while frequency determines how fast it vibrates. If you recall, we have discussed each motor type in excruciating detail while also talking about both of these terminologies. It was important because you get to adjust both here. If you have watched those segments, you would know exactly what to do here. There's no frequency slider for ERM because, like I mentioned, frequency and amplitude are linked exponentially, so increasing one variable will result in increase in the other. The range for amplitude is 10 to 100 for all three. Frequency range for LRA is 5 to 55 Hz and 50 to 150 Hz for transducer. You can choose to have a more quiet experience, but not only will it make less noise, it will also dampen the overall vibrations. Aside from this and firmware update, the software cannot offer anything more at this point of time, which is why for these haptics to work, you need Simhub. Setting it up is quite easy. After connecting everything, you would want to make your way over to Arduino and click on My Hardware. Then click on Multiple Arduino. In this page, you will see these three options: Scan all ports, scan selected port, and scan nothing. Click on scan all ports and it will automatically recognize the haptics. You can double check here to see if Simhub has got the correct one. Once it shows Simnet motors from 1 to 3 and connected here, you're good to go. Then you move your way over to Shake It motors, then motors output, and you would enable Arduino motors and fans. After which, you will simply click to test all 3 motors. Once they vibrate, you can then move on to enable anything you like on either of these motors. Now I've been told by Simnet that proper support by Simhub will be added soon, so consider this way of setting them up temporary. Now before we move on to talk about how it feels, it's essential to address an overlooked factor: mounting position. These, while working absolutely fine, aren't mounted correctly. Now some would say that mounting position does not matter, but as a person who loves to experiment and let physics be the guide, I have to disagree. Here's why. The haptic force should ideally oppose the pedal's travel direction for the most natural and effective way. For ERM motors, orientation is crucial. The eccentric mass creates strongest forces perpendicular to its rotation axis, which this 180-degree angle does not optimize. LRA motors need alignment with its movement axis. Here it's vibrating vertically while our pedal travels horizontally. Transducer, thanks to their voice coil design, remains consistent regardless of the orientation. These aren't just theoretical concerns, they affect the feedback directly. Or you can mount them however and enjoy the vibrations. Now that we are finally here, let me start by saying that I was not expecting this. Before mounting, I knew these motors were powerful, but their true strength only became clear after installation. I ran a quick test in Simhub to check if everything is in order, and for a split second my soul left my body, because in the dead silence of the room I heard this. It was quite the experience. Despite the incorrect orientation, the vibrations were so immensely powerful that I thought my leg hairs might vibrate right off. It almost resembled to having a bass shaker mounted under my seat. Well, not exactly, but it was strong enough to vibrate my entire 4080 rig. But this was before tuning. For a more natural feel, I reduced their strength, and soon I completely forgot about the mounting position. These motors are very powerful, and honestly, I prefer to have something powerful and use it at slightly less power than to have something weak maxed out. I started with my all-time favorite, the Rally 2.0, in which I deliberately used gear shift frequency on both ERM and LRA. And after a few minutes of gameplay, purely based on what I felt, I realized that ERM was keeping up with LRA at least 7 out of 10 times. Right? I mean, I could feel the slightly slower stopping times of the ERM, but the startup times were nearly impossible to differentiate. It was like watching a Fiat Panda trying to keep up with a Golf GTI. But just for my peace of mind, I decided to check the gear shifts separately with ERM and LRA. And I still could not tell which one was being quicker. ERM was being very responsive no matter what game I tried. So I decided to make circuit racing my test subject and change the frequency from gear shift to ABS. I maxed out ABS level in game so it would kick in more often, and I still could not tell which motor was quicker. This went on for days before I replaced LRA with Transducer to see if ERM would be able to trade blows. And well, of course, it cannot match the response time of a Transducer, but the delay never felt significant. When you compare the working principle of both of these motors, it's only natural to believe that the gap in responsiveness would be astronomical. But somehow it still felt like ERM was keeping up, even if a few milliseconds behind. After nearly a month with these, I found my preferences. I like RPM and speed on the ERM because its gradual spin from low to high delivers a satisfying thump. It was like sitting in a race car screaming at 8000 RPM. The way it builds and fades from idle to acceleration to deceleration feels absolutely fantastic. For gear shifts, ABS and traction control, LRA provides the best experience. I play a lot of rally and use a sequential shifter, and since rally cars have zero dampening, I love how the LRA's sharp kick matches the clank of my shifter. I use the transducer for curb effect. But don't take this as a definitive ranking. These are my preferences, yours may vary. Long story short, all three motors were insanely quick to pick up on telemetry data and provide frequencies. They have more than enough strength to shake the living soul out of you. It's clear that Simnet spent a lot of time optimizing both hardware and software. But now it's time to shift focus to something which I have been dying to share. Latency test. Now that I had a proper reason to conduct the test, I could not wait to find out how good the ERM was. For this, I relied on my old testing method. I placed the haptic and the monitor in front of the camera and recorded the upshift and downshift times at 240 frames per second, with each frame equaling exactly 4.16 milliseconds. This setup made it easier to capture both input from the game and the reaction time of haptics. In Simhub, I set the pulse duration to 80 milliseconds and the strength to 20. The change in animation in this speedometer is counted as the first frame or the starting point. And for each frame the motor does not respond contributes to the total latency. I know this isn't the most accurate way to get the results due to various factors such as limitations of my camera, game's frame data, monitor's response time, telemetry inputs, etc. At best, it serves as an approximation, but it still provides enough data to support my claims. I conducted tests under two conditions, one with the game's refresh rate capped at 60 Hz and another at 180 Hz, my monitor's maximum. While I strongly suspected that frame rate could impact the results, I wasn't able to gather a definitive answer, so I included both. Before we begin, keep in mind that this data will vary slightly with each repetition or activation. Starting with ERM, I simply removed the cover so the rotating mass would be visible. First game on the list is Dirt Rally 2.0 at 60 Hz. Aside from the engagement of first gear, which took almost 21 milliseconds, I would say that the motor performed quite consistently, whether you look at upshift or downshift times. Despite the data showing a 21 millisecond delay, I could not feel anything. Everything was on point. At 180 Hz, neutral to third gear shows an improvement, and then we see a 30 millisecond delay in fourth gear, but still nothing that I would call slow. Downshift times were more or less the same except on 5th and 4th gear. Next up, I have ACC at 60 Hz, where moving from neutral to first shows a whopping 62.4 millisecond delay. On paper, it seems like a lot, but believe me, this is not perceivable. It is very, very fast. Then you might be seeing a negative frame. It means the haptic motor is predicting the shift before the game's visual update. Obviously, this does not mean that the motor is reacting faster than my inputs. It just reacts quicker than the game's visual update. Impressive for an ERM. Even on the downshift, timing is very impeccable. 4 times it got exactly 12.48 milliseconds and then a negative 16.64. At 180 Hz, the story was more or less the same, except the 79.04 millisecond delay. But again, number seems higher on paper, imperceptible in real world. Moving on to Automobilista 2 at 60 Hz shows really impressive timing, from negative to 0 to positive frame on upshift times, and very impressive data overall when including downshifts as well. At 180 Hz, we do see the delay from 16.64 milliseconds to 20.8 milliseconds, but it's nothing. Still fairly quick overall. Moving on to Richard Burns Rally, I could not find a way to cap the game's frame rate, so I left it alone. Now here you might be seeing delays in double digits, and it is for a good reason. The Gauger plugin animates quicker than the car's dash, so I measured this time on the plugin. The car's dash displays the data 3 to 4 frames later, but it actually does not make a difference from where you start counting. There is no way you will be able to perceive a 3 frame or 12.48 millisecond difference. So if it really matters, you can subtract 12.48 milliseconds or 16.64 milliseconds from the data. But like I said, not going to make a difference overall. For EAWRC, the case was same as RBR. No in-game method to cap the frame rate, so I let it run as it is. But the results were extremely surprising. Irrespective of where I counted the change in the first frame, the on-screen display speedometer or the car's display, the results were incredible. Every single time the haptic motor reacted quicker than the visual change. Moving on to Transducer, I removed the top cap so I could see exactly when it will move. Except I couldn't, so I stuck a tiny magnet to it. Now each time that transducer vibrated, magnet did too. Easy. In Dirt Valley 2.0 at 60 Hz, we see the time well under 16 milliseconds, except the last downshift at 20.8. At 180 Hz, we see an increment across the board with the highest recorded time of 24.96 milliseconds, but it still never felt like it was slow. ACC at 60 Hz was super quick, with time ranging from 4.16 milliseconds to the highest of 74.88 milliseconds. If we keep the initial warm-up phase aside, the motor is still being quick. The story is more or less the same when I switch to 180 Hz. We see a 70.72 millisecond delay when upshifting to first gear, and then very quickly the motor showed its agility. We even got negative frame when downshifting from 4th to 3rd. Automobilista 2 at 60 Hz showed impressive timings, ranging from negative frame to a highest of 16.64 milliseconds. Here we got negative frames thrice, which is impressive. At 180 Hz, the results seem to improve with a couple of negative frames to a lot of 0 frames. The highest time we got is of 20.8 milliseconds, still very rapid. Moving on to RBR, we see a bit of consistency in upshift times with 33.28 milliseconds being the highest time recorded. But like I mentioned earlier, the Gauger plugin updates 3 to 4 frames quicker, so if you really want to, you can subtract 12.48 or 16.64 milliseconds from this result. But overall, nothing to complain about. In EAWRC, the motor has been super quick to respond to gear shifts, whether be it on upshifts or downshifts. Literally not a single positive frame. How cool is that? Now finally moving on to LRA, and boy have I been looking forward to this. Measuring its latency was tricky since its outer shell holds the entire structure together. Removing the top cover would compromise the solid foundation that the magnetic mass moves between. So instead, I placed a glass of water on the heel rest. When the haptic vibrates, any delay would be visible as ripples in the water. I know what you might be thinking, but hear me out. Since the pedal arm is made out of aluminium, I looked up the speed of sound in the material. Because vibrations are mechanical waves, this serves as a good approximation for how fast they travel through aluminium. With that in mind, I calculated the distance. The vibration moves down the pedal arm to the pivot point transferred into the pedal tray and finally reaches the heel rest, where the glass of water sits. The total distance came out to be about 25 centimeters. I had the velocity and distance, meaning finding the time was easy, which came out to be 0.0000391 or 39 microseconds. Even with some energy dissipation, the delay is nearly imperceptible and well under 1 millisecond. The water should react almost instantly to the pedal vibrations on paper. But it won't, because water has surface tension, so it will take a moment for it to break, ripples to form and then become visible. Then you add a little bit of delay for material transmission, glass absorption and transfer, and water surface response. Combining all of this, I could see a delay of about 10 to 12 milliseconds. So I subtracted 10 milliseconds from the final result. With my state-of-the-art measurement device thoroughly explained, let's move on to latency test. In Dirt Valley 2.0 at 60 Hz, the highest time recorded was 39.32 milliseconds, with the lowest of 10.8 milliseconds. Mostly it hovered around the 20 millisecond mark. At 180 Hz, the result was surprisingly more or less the same, with the lowest of 19.21 milliseconds and the highest still 39.92 milliseconds. In ACC at 60 Hz, aside from the initial gear engagement, the motor showed its agility, with the highest time of 88.84 milliseconds and the lowest of 10.8 milliseconds. At 180 Hz, the result was once again more or less the same, except this time the highest is 98.16 milliseconds and the lowest still remaining 10.8 milliseconds. All in all, well under the 20 millisecond mark and averaging close to 10 milliseconds. In AMS2 at 60 Hz, the highest time recorded was 19.12 milliseconds in upshift and lowest at 10.8 milliseconds. It is still hovering around the 10 to 12 millisecond average mark. At 180 Hz, all of a sudden the time starts to dip below 10 milliseconds. We see the lowest of 6.64 milliseconds and highest 19.12 milliseconds. That too, only once. All in all, very impressive. Coming to RBR, the times are again averaging a good 25 millisecond mark, but you know the drill. If you want, you can subtract 3 to 4 frames from this data, but it won't change anything. It is still very quick. With the data covered, we got to see that ERM is truly a magnificent beast here. Sure, it has delays like other motors, but to be able to keep up with them, that's something else. Once again, this method isn't the most accurate way of measuring latency, but is still good enough to provide some numbers. Right then, we have covered everything: how each motor work, real-life performance, and latency test. The data speaks for itself. All three motors performed incredibly well, especially considering their price point. And while I have found my sweet spot with these configurations, understanding the technical principle behind each motor type is what truly matters. Anyone who tells you there is a universal best type probably hasn't done their homework. That's been it. I've been Dark Snape, and may the downforce be with you.